You know, I can't think of a funny way to start this video that isn't going to get me canceled in 20 years when it randomly resurfaces, so instead, I'm just going to tell you that this weekend I got sunburned picking pumpkins. So that's where I'm at in life. Hey, what's up? My name is John Bonjour. I'm an artist and a film enthusiast. I have drawn some art, and I am continuing my Halloween retrospective series, this time with Rob Zombie's Halloween 1 and 2. Get your shit buckled. I cannot express to you how interested I am to see what you guys think of these movies because I have so many unexpected opinions from having already seen them. Starting off with Halloween 1, this came out in 2007, again directed by Rob Zombie, who, by the way, is an interesting choice to direct a Halloween remake. I see what they were going for because John Carpenter does a lot of music. He did the music for his original movies. I get why you would think, okay, Rob Zombie also directs horror, also does music for movies, and also just music in general. Connect them, shits. Let's connect those dots. So for the first time, maybe at all in this series, I'm not questioning producer decisions that got us here, which feels really weird. I do, however, question quite a few of Rob Zombie's decisions, and we're just gonna jump right into that. I've seen both of these movies one time before watching them for this series. I remember feeling like it was fine. I thought it was all right. I remember liking these movies pretty significantly. So I kind of went into this going, okay, I can't remember. Everybody hates these. Why do I like them? Watching them again, I have no idea why I liked this movie. We'll get to 2 in a minute, but I don't know what possessed me to give this a 4 stars on Letterboxd out of 5, in case you were wondering. Follow me on Letterboxd. Well, I don't know what happened to me, but I don't think it's that now. I don't at all. I think this movie is, it's bizarre. It's very, very bizarre, and some of it works, especially toward the end. I think some of it works, and then some of it really doesn't. Some of it really, really doesn't. Most of it really doesn't. Almost all of it really doesn't. Jumping in with my favorite kill, it's Joe Grizzly, bitch. That's not a joke. That is the truth. That is absolutely my favorite kill. Because it's the first one that isn't, I was going to say it's the first one that's not gross, and that's not true, because they're all gross, but you want them to be gross in a fun way, and this is the first kill that I think is gross in a slasher way, and not in like a, I feel not good about watching this kind of way. That's how I feel about the majority of the opening 30 minutes of this movie, so it's very refreshing once we get to Joe Grizzly. We get something that doesn't make me feel like some sort of weird pervert for watching it. Pretty cool. I like that. I like not feeling like a pervert, just to be clear. I will say that is one strength that these movies have. The kills are good. The kills are really solid, and they're very realistic and gross and brutal. Something I greatly appreciate in a slasher movie. That is one thing that I cannot take away from these movies. They are really gnarly in a very fun way some of the time. That brings us pretty instinctively to my positives for this movie. There's a few. It's not like a resurrection situation. I don't hate this movie. It is weird though, because I do hate probably the first half of this movie. I guess we'll dig into why in a minute here, but the part that I do like is the sort of back half of the movie. It's almost like halfway through the movie, it remembers like, oh, that's right, we're a Halloween movie. I guess we should do some of that. So a solid half of this movie is a very interesting, extremely watchable Halloween remake that unfortunately you have to sit through the other half to get to. I do like that Danny Trejo is in this for like 8 business seconds. He's fun. There are multiple cuts of these, I think both of these movies. I watched the theatrical for both because I had seen the extended or directors or whatever they call it, and they're both significantly ickier, and so I just didn't want to do that again. I'm sure that there are purists of these movies that will hate me for that, and I'm cool with that. I understand. But that said, a thing that's in both of them, obviously, Michael Myers. He is, when he's an adult, he is probably the best part of this movie. He is huge and super imposing. This might be the scariest Michael Myers that we have, like in all of film. Let me clarify, I'm not saying he's the most haunting Michael Myers, but in terms of just who would I rather meet in an alleyway, anyone but this guy. Literally anyone. He is massive, and I fully believe anytime that he survives a car crash or stabs somebody and it goes way further than it should, or, anytime he's like ripping people's limbs off, I buy it because look at the guy. He's basically a human Wookiee. Now, part of what lends this movie to feeling like that is obviously that Tyler Mane is huge and incredibly scary to look at. But I think another thing that kind of works in its favor is that it's shot really well. Obviously, you have the natural build, but I think Rob Zombie does a great job of putting that into kind of a scene where you get to see him in relation to other objects. I think they shot this very similarly to a Godzilla movie sometimes, and that works really well. Also, it's just an interestingly shot movie. It looks good. A little grainy for my taste, kind of that fake grain. I don't know if it's actually fake grain, but it sure feels like it. But it looks good. It's shot well. There's a lot of lingering shots, which I'm very into. I know a lot of people probably aren't. But I think it's interesting, and it does a good job setting this apart from the other movies. And then, like I said, the biggest positive of this movie is that the last 40 minutes are really pretending to be a Halloween movie. And when they're doing that, I think it works really well. This is almost enough to make it worth watching, but I guess, spoilers for about 3 seconds from now, it is very much not. That brings us to that beautiful little segment we call negatives, of which there are many. The biggest negative, and I fully understand that this comes down to taste. This is not is it a quality film? It has nothing to do with that. I hate Rob Zombie's movies. I really do. The one about witches that he did was pretty okay. Salem something, pretty all right. And then Halloween 2 we'll get to, but other than that, I don't like his movies. They're not for me. He's got this weird, just skeezy Kentucky Fried kind of pastiche that he puts over everything. I don't know what it is, but every time I watch one of his movies, it makes me feel just gross inside. Not in like a fun, interesting way like an Exorcist would, but just in a way that's like, I feel yucky. I feel like I have to take a shower after his movies. Part of that is probably the way it's shot, but I think the majority of that is the writing, which I can't repeat. I would say 80% of this script because my mom watches these videos. In fact, I thought about for a long time this morning, am I going to do like a tirade about all of the horrible, just horrific, disgusting language in this movie? And I can't because, again, hi, Mom. I'm really not going to do that to you. I promise. And just to clarify, this is not an opinion on my part about whether or not there should be cursing. I have a podcast with 2 of my best friends. It's called Twinkie Talk. I guess I'm plugging that in the middle of this. Anyway, we curse quite a lot, and I have no problem with that. I think that's perfectly fine. But the volume of cursing in this is just, it's unnecessary at some point. It gets in the way because you have to kind of translate through this hillbilly, filter out all the horrible words, and then you understand what the sentence is. Like, I need a Rosetta Stone for some of the things they said in this. And like I said, I'm sure that's a positive for some people, but it just is not a good thing. That doesn't sell me on a movie, especially not when that's kind of the only thing that you get for the first 30 to 50 minutes. But I think the writing has a lot more negatives than just the choice of words. The pace on this movie is really bad and almost completely due to the script exclusively. The first, I don't know, 30, 50 minutes, I'm not sure, but it feels like forever. We spend with Michael as a kid. I'm not inherently opposed to that. I don't think Michael Myers is a character that we need a real life serial killer drama about, nor do we need to go into a lot of his backstory and what makes him tick. Like I said in Resurrection, that's part of what makes that movie not work, is that they're trying to figure that out. That being said, I can see a version of this where they do dive into his history and they try to explain his psyche. There's a version of that that could work. This is 100% not it. 0% of what they try to do with that works in this. 0. But there is a version of that I could see working in my mind. But instead of interspersing these parts kind of through the movie in a natural way, they decide to just have this opening whatever chunk of movie before you get to the movie that you paid for, or in my case, signed up for a free week or month or whatever it is of AMC Plus, and then cancel so that you don't have to give any money at all to this movie. I also think another thing that doesn't work, and this is, to be fair, not really a fair comparison, but you choose to remake a movie and then you're going to have those 2 movies be compared. Dr. Loomis is nothing in this. Like, he is a nothing character who does nothing. He's kind of selfish, maybe. They delve a lot more into him in part 2 to varying degrees of success, but he's just nothing in this. And when you compare that to Donald Pleasance, you know my opinion on Donald Pleasance, it's just really disappointing. He becomes a character that you kind of forget is supposed to be Loomis, and then he comes in and you're like, you're not just a random guy. Right, yeah, you're his doctor. Speaking of forgetting, when the title credit does eventually hit and the Halloween music comes in, I experienced just an out-of-body whiplash moment. It was insane. Like, I felt like I was high for a minute. I'd completely forgotten what franchise this movie was in, and then it just brought it back to Halloween with that classic score, and it was crazy. I don't even know if that's a negative, but just I wanted to share that with you. Another huge victim of the pacing, though, is that we don't meet Laurie Strode, our supposedly protagonist, until 50 minutes into the movie. That one I do know. I clocked that. 50 minutes into the movie. That's almost an hour of a movie before you meet your protagonist. Laurie is also kind of a nothing character in this. She doesn't get any chance to develop or grow. She's just a person that, because she's named Laurie Strode, we just kind of assume, oh, she's probably important. If you hadn't seen the original Halloween, it would mean nothing to you. Her interactions with Tommy Doyle do a lot to bring character to her, but not enough that I can say she's standout or even really a good character. But I just don't get the sense that that's really what Rob Zombie was in it for. I don't think he's here to give us deep, thematic, emotional characters as much as he is just to show us gross shit on a screen and people getting stabbed. Which, to be fair, that part I buy. But I do think you lose a lot of the characterization that made the original good, just for the sake of watching other people get stabbed and then kind of recreating scenes. But again, that's really a fault of the pacing more than it is anything else in this movie. If we had met Laurie and her friends earlier on in the film, we would care more about them when they die, instead of just being the naked guy and the naked girl. They're not characters, they're just kills, which I think also works okay, unless you set your whole movie around, we're gonna go deep dive into character, which is what the first so many minutes of this movie try to do. With that, my final thoughts, the only reason that this works is some small amount of time it decides to be a Halloween movie. The things that are Halloween about it almost bring it into being a watchable movie for me, but it just doesn't quite work. I can understand where they were going with this. I see the value in a true crime serial killer documentary kind of movie, but it just doesn't work for me. It's not really my cup of tea, and when you cut that out of it, it's just sort of a middle-of-the-road slasher. It's not horrible. I was expecting to have a lot more just truly awful things to say about it, but aside from it just being gross and not super fun to watch, it's all right, I guess. Like, I don't judge people for liking this. It's just not for me. And just like that, we jump into Halloween 2, also obviously directed by Rob Zombie, came out in 2009. My experience with this movie is pretty limited. I watched it once and I thought, hey, that was better than the first one. Watched it again, and guess what? Better than the first one. Pretty significantly better than the first one. I like this movie a lot. Actually, I'd go so far as to say I would watch this movie again. I would not watch the 2007 Halloween probably ever again if I really have a choice in the matter. I would definitely watch this again. I would just have to remember what happened before this, but I think I can handle that. This is a really good modern slasher movie that's very worth watching. Speaking of the slasher elements, my favorite kill in this movie is right at the end. It is a huge spoiler, so if you haven't seen it, click away. If you haven't seen it, why are you here? I mean, I love you, but why? What's going on? Anyway, my favorite kill is when Dr. Loomis gets just carved straight to hell. First and foremost, it's disgusting, which I think works greatly in its favor. Second of all, it's character that I truly hate in this movie. Just probably the worst thing about this movie, Dr. Loomis. So seeing him just get annihilated, it's pretty nice. It feels pretty good. It's vindication. It kind of feels like Donald Pleasance was sort of looking down and going, yeah, nice, cool. You know what you did. You know what you did last time. So it's a great kill. I will say this was a tough competition. Pretty much every kill in this movie is really solid. There's a couple that are kind of off screen and not really focused on. Those, I guess, don't really make the cut. But otherwise, the kills that we see, the kills that we really get in this movie are tremendous. That cycles very nicely into the positives. It's all the good things from the first one packed in with more and just juiced up, and then with other kind of new elements that work way better than what they were trying to do in the original. And Michael is no exception. He's just as huge, just as interesting to watch. His kills are really, really great. I mean, just so great. The people in the field, the one guy that he puts on the antlers, I mean, it doesn't get a lot better than putting a guy on antlers. But outside of that, his characterization is also really interesting to me. I was all right with the mask design in the first one. I think I really didn't have anything to say about it because it was just It's just a mask. I love this direction that they went for with the mask. The way that it's tearing and breaking down his face, just like a cheap Halloween mask would, I think it works really, really well. I also understand another thing where I'm like, I get why you probably might not like that if you're just used to the shape, normal shape. It took me a second too to get used to Hobo Michael with the beard and all that. But I really got on board, and I appreciate the visual elements that this movie goes for. Oh, that's one thing that I didn't say in the last one. I really like the masks. Just a cool image, like the many, many masks behind him on the wall. It's a neat image. Just not the point, not even a part of this movie, but it's a neat image. Anyway, back to this. Laurie gets, finally, some characterization. The way that she's dealing with the PTSD, her addictions, her rage, the not being able to sleep, the waking nightmares that may or may not be psychic, that's up to you. All of that works super well, and it finally connects me to this character that I know I was supposed to connect to in the first one, but just really couldn't. I also appreciate that it sets itself apart from any of the Lauries that have come before. You had H2O, where she was sort of like reserved, just processing trauma as best she could. This is a Laurie that just is not going to process it for dick. She is not going to even start to think about it, which is an interesting characterization, and I think it really fits the world that Rob Zombie has created. Speaking of which, another huge positive, most of the gross Rob Zombie-isms are gone. There's a couple of scenes, but most of those scenes are pretty short-lived, and there's other things going on that you can appreciate about them. I've seen a couple of articles saying that like producers stepped in a lot, and he didn't really enjoy making this movie, and I don't doubt that for a single second. And also, it's a much better movie because of it. Maybe the first time that huge studio meddling in the middle of a movie was a good thing, but it worked a lot better, so I don't know what to tell you. There's a lot of great stuff to say about it. This is a really engaging movie, and it's paced very strangely, just like the first one, but not as abrasively strange, just in a unique way that is almost more engaging, if you want to look at it that way. I'm not entirely sure what it is that moves the needle on that for me. I realize I'm saying a lot of the same things about both movies, but one of them is good and one of them is bad. I don't know exactly what it is, but this movie just works a lot better for me. I think part of it is probably that it's just less disturbing overall. There's a lot to be said for a horror movie being disturbing, and probably they should be on some level. But I can't stress this enough, Rob Zombie's blend of disturbing just is not my thing. That leads pretty well into the negatives for this. The dream stuff is weird, right? The horse is weird. The horse is a weird call. I'm not even saying I'm hugely opposed to it, but it's a weird call. Also, the whole dream Michael, baby Michael thing, I could have done without it personally. I hesitate to say that it's truly a negative as much as it's just a thing that I don't know that I particularly like. I think there's a difference between those two, but I also feel pretty confident in saying that that is a thing that doesn't totally work for this movie. It could have, but it doesn't. It's also very frustrating that the first many kills of the movie are part of a dream that never actually happened. I get what he's going for, I understand, but it's like when you see a Saw movie and one of the traps doesn't actually happen, you just see it in people's heads. Maybe it has an effect, but it's a frustrating effect. I would say the biggest negative for this movie is very clearly Loomis. Very, very clearly. He is a horrible character. I mean that in the sense that he is a horrible man in the story, and I mean that in the sense that he is a horribly written character. The whole first movie, we are led to believe that he genuinely cares about this kid, and yes, he wrote a book, but that's not the point. He's there for this kid, and he's there for the family. This one, Loomis is just a dickhead. I understand that there's probably some through line to get to that. I get it. That's not a huge issue that I have. He's just a frustrating character, especially when Loomis in the other movies is supposed to be such a good character, an interesting character. Not always a good guy, but a well-written, interesting character that develops in a natural way. Except for that one. But Loomis in this is just so frustrating and gross. He has a lot of the sense of the old kind of Rob Zombie-isms. He carries a lot of that weight. It just doesn't feel like it fits in this movie all that well. Which is why when he dies, I'm certainly not sad about it. Speaking of the end, there's a lot, like I said, there's a couple of different versions. There are two different endings. This one that I watched was the one where Laurie comes out with the mask and she's just sort of standing there and then she gets put in prison. Or maybe not, maybe it's a dream because there's the horse. Anyway, she goes crazy. I really like that ending quite a bit. I think that's interesting. I think it's a solid, it's almost like Zombie knew, like we are probably not going to get more of these, probably. So let's just leave it in a really sour note. I'd say that's probably my final thoughts on it. It's a really sour note to end the movie on, but it's a pretty sour series, so I don't mind that. I think that's interesting. Honestly, going from beginning to end of this duology, it's pretty poetic, and I think not beautiful because it's gross, but there's something there. It feels like there was intention behind what they did. Halloween 2 is a really solid slasher. It's really good. It's definitely the most engaging of the two. It's one of the more engaging Halloween movies, I would say. I do think that these, generally speaking, fall a little bit lower than most of the Halloween movies for me. Not because they're inherently worse, although I would say 1 definitely is, but 2 isn't inherently worse than many of the sequels. It's probably better, but I think the original Halloween set such a specific tone that these don't even try to go for, so it's hard to kind of rank them in the series because they're just completely different beasts. As a duology, they're interesting. If you can get past the first 50 or so minutes of part 1, you've got a solid movie and a third that are really good. Thank you for watching this video and checking out my channel. If you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on the Halloween movies, well, guess what? I've done several other videos on them, and we've got one more coming out next week that'll come out on Halloween. That is October 31st, a Tuesday. So be on the lookout for that and check out my other videos. If you want to hear my thoughts on other movies, maybe that aren't specifically Halloween movies, comic books, TV shows, Star Wars-based puzzles, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and comment down below what you want me to review. Or do none of those things because I am not your dad. The way that it's tearing and breaking down his face... Don't cut this. Don't cut any of this out of context.